Hello everyone and welcome back to the 12 Days of Deltarune. Today we will be diving into the theory I was working on before Chapter 5 got released. So a little backstory on this theory. Um, it arose quite a while ago when Toby released a clip of the mic room with the mics. Um, Something in there spurred me on to want to make this video. Why did I never make it? Well, along with a few other ideas I had at the time, it didn't really progress my narrative I was building up to towards Neo Shadows on the Wall. And also, I don't know, it just kind of fell to the wayside at some point. So, Mike. We're talking about Mike. Who is Mike? Is that even a question we're supposed to be asking anymore? Chapter 3 kind of, not in a mean way, but did poke fun at our obsession with Mike. Literally, one of the Mikes is an obsessed conspiracy theorist trying to find out who the original Mike is. And when, after all of that, we leave the room, we are confronted with just a microphone. Just like a real-world microphone. It all feels like one big joke. So are we supposed to take Mike seriously still? Well, I don't really know, but I think so. Because the mic room is so inundated with imagery of Friend, a character who we are also pretty obsessed with, who is also very mysterious, and who is also probably going to be important at some point. So, surely there is something going on here. Right? Well, we know that Friend is most likely the person who contacted Spampton on the phone, probably. I mean, I've put a lot of evidence on screen. It's kind of all over the place, so we're just going to go one point at a time here. It might not be one piece of evidence at a time here, but whatever. So we don't see Friend in Chapter 1 at all, which is kind of strange because we see Friend in every other chapter after that. But Chapter 1 was kind of weird. The shadow crystals weren't a thing yet, which makes me think that, Friend being inherently sort of mysterious and probably related to the shadow crystals, that kind of makes sense. So the first place we see Friend is in the Chapter 2 basement, where we then fight Spampton. And the two of them are also both referenced on Noelle's blog during the Spampton sweepstakes. Not like together, but kind of. Spampton gives out peepus, which appear to be blue eggs, and apparently sent a spam email to Noelle, if we're to believe the sweepstakes, that turned into a cat petter's character that was corrupted and left home due to happiness, which also doesn't really make sense. This is somewhat a reference to the odd egg glitch in Pokemon, or at least seemingly, which is, it's a glitch Pokemon and the sprite ends up being an egg, right? This specific line she says, it's like in the middle of the screen on the right. A white egg showed up on my screen, but there was a message with it, special. Spampton is also known for saying special, like it's misspelled, but special, which also ties these two things together. Friend is, of course, inherently related to Cat Petters somehow, because all of the minigames in the mic room are Cat Petters minigames that Noelle describes on her blog. And the one we get to play, that Noelle talks about, is one where she got a cat that lowered how many points she had. Guess which cat that is? Yes, it is Friend. The element for the puppet scarf, which you get from Spampton, is puppet/cat, which implies, Spampton was a puppet. It implies the puppeteer was a cat. And of course, we know Friend is a cat. So that all kind of links together too. Airwaves has Spampton's motif in it and the Freedom theme, and it plays while Friend can be on screen. Whenever Spampton talks about friends, Spampton seems to mention either Mike or phones, and Mike is linked to phones because the entrance to the mic room, this is in the far bottom left of the screen, uses Mike spelled out on an old cell phone keyboard as the password. which links Mike to phones, and phones are linked with friends through we don't need friends. I can make my hands in the phone, and Mike and friend are linked between friend, me, friends. Oh, Kris, you and me were already friend request accepted. We don't need Mike. It's very sort of all over the place, as you might expect for a mysterious creature like friend, but there is a link between these entities. However, the idea that friend might literally just be Mike seems to be challenged by this video, where Tenna says, "You told me. You told me you had a bad feeling about that contract, that he wasn't supposed to sign it, that he couldn't. You cared about him too, Mike." But the contract we're talking about here is the same contract that ruined Spamton in the end. But this means that a cat is still puppeteering Spamton, so friend is the most likely option. But Mike didn't want Spamton to sign the contract. So Mike isn't friend? Like they're two separate entities, but they are so intrinsically linked. How does this work? Like literally, if we go back here, the Mike room has yellow and pink eyes on a black background. There are cat statues in it. Friend literally appears in it. How are these two not directly related? Well, there is another way. You see, in that same conversation, Tenna said something interesting. Tenna says, "I know Mike better than you, and sometimes he is a cute little Pluie." Pluie, of course, jokingly being the name for Cat Mike, or, the cat on the left side of the screen. Which does look like friend, of course. But it also implies something that I hadn't really thought about very much at all. While I was playing through Chapter 3, I just sort of assumed that the reason Tenna can't tell the difference between the three different fake mics is that Tenna just doesn't pay very much attention to his employees, right? It's a joke about that. Mike is always off-screen anyway. Tenna doesn't even really know what Mike looks like. But Tenna clearly does know what Mike looks like, and is in fact totally aware that Mike is changing appearance drastically. Tenna is saying right here that sometimes Mike is a cute little cat, and sometimes isn't. And he sees no problem in that. He also doesn't seem to be aware that the mics are not the real Mike, because in this dialogue, he is talking to them as if they would know this past event about Spamton. So how can that be true as well? How can we have Tenna understanding that Mike is three different looking people and still believe that that's the original Mike? Well, what if the original Mike was also like that? In other words, what if the original Mike was only sometimes a cat? You see, the three mics are three different fan theories made into characters that are like, fake characters, kind of. They are characters within the world of Deltarune. Motormouth Mike is a microphone. Cat Mike is friend. And I don't remember what the Cowboy Mike is, but there's an official name, but Cowboy Mike is a reference to friend inside of me, or Woody theory. What if all three are true? And that is why these three specific theories were chosen. You see, however, in these plushies, like every single one, there is something if you are willing to cut them open and find out what it is. So inside this Shawn plushie is a key, the key that you need to open Jevel's cage, right? Well, in Dessa's room, you can find that in her bin, she has frayed yarn and buttons. And toys, specifically sort of toys with, felt outlinings or sort of plushy toys, are known to sometimes have like the friend inside of me theory would suggest, a little speaker. So what if this all comes together? Mike is a microphone that was inside of a toy, like the friend inside of me theory. And Mike was also a cat. That cat being Sham. There's a lot of evidence that links friend to Sham, or at least Sham to the concept of friend in general. Again, this is a lot, but we're gonna go through this slowly but surely. The biggest and perhaps most important evidence actually came to us quite a while ago. In the newsletter where the Sham plushie was released, Toby did a brief rundown on Sham's design for the plushie. He says, I gave them a staff with which they can cast magic. Dusty magic that twinkles like broken dreams. Although it could sort of be considered official, there's no tail. Should they have a large fluffy tail? Or maybe it was torn off by cruel and loving hands. Anyway, by now, the tail in your mind should be stronger than anything I show you. Don't be discouraged. Obviously, friend is heavily associated with the tail of hell, which seems to be a severed tail, and this description is specifically mentioning that Sham's tail may have been torn off. The line of the tail in your mind should be stronger than anything I show you seems like a joke at first. However, you can read into that and say the tail of hell is obviously something people are going to theorize about, and Toby has already kind of acknowledged the theories around friend a little bit with the mics. So that could be implied to be Toby saying, I'm sure you guys are going to come up with some wild theories for what the tail of hell was, right? The tail in your mind is stronger than anything I could show you now, because obviously Toby wouldn't want to spoil it. Don't be discouraged. Literally saying, yeah, think about it. I'm also going to bring back something from one of my previous videos where I talked about a yokai called the Bakeneko and how I thought it might connect to friend in some way. In that section, there's a part about cutting off cats' tails in Japan. We know Chapter 5 is going to be based around Japan, so this actually might be more important than, we might have previously thought. In Japan, there was a folk belief that cats with long tails like snakes could bewitch people. By the way, Sham is the court magician. Keep that in mind. Cats with long tails were disliked, and there was a custom of cutting their tails. It is speculated that this is the reason there are so many cats in Japan with short tails now, as natural selection favored those with short tails. So what if, like these pull-string toys, Sham also had a voice box in their body? And the activation for that was not a pull string or a drawstring on the back, but rather their tail. I know that seems kind of weird, but pulling on a cat's tail and then it's speaking actually would make for somewhat of a sensible toy idea. If the toy went like, youch, or something, because they make messed up kids' toys all the time. And I would not be surprised if that is how the tail got torn off. Someone was playing with the toy, maybe it was actually Des, and they pulled the tail too hard and it disconnected. Sham no longer has a tail. What this thematically could mean is that Sham no longer speaks, quote unquote, or Sham's voice can no longer sort of resonate. So thematically, you could see that as being the moment where Sham's importance in the story disappeared. Because Sham no longer has a voice, right? Do you kind of get where I'm coming from with that? King says in Chapter 4,
a shame he had to be tricked away by his closest companion, the magician Sham, whose smile has gone empty since that day.
Obviously, this sort of belies the underlying theme of Friend, which is a smile without a cat. This is a reference to Alice in Wonderland, which Chapter 1 is also kind of Alice in Wonderland-like. A classic line from Alice in Wonderland is, well, I've often seen a cat without a grin, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat. It's the most curious thing I ever saw in my life. friend is, of course, a grin without a cat. If Sham is the cat that the grin has now gone empty from, that could explain King's line as being foreshadowing and tie in with the Alice in Wonderland theming. And then, of course, what I already said about Tenna, saying that sometimes Mike is a cat. And that also would explain something that I've found a little curious for a while. Obviously, Sham is basically our quest giver for the Shadow Crystals. After we get the one from Jevil, we have to go back to them after we get each new one and give them the crystal. I guess we don't have to, but in order to find out a hint for the next one, we kind of do. And Sham has a connection to each of the secret bosses. Obviously, Sham and Jevil used to be close friends. Sham used to live in Gerson's unused classroom, so Sham used to be a toy of Gerson's at some point. And like I was saying, in Des's room, we can find frayed yarn and buttons. But beyond that, there's also a line from Susie if you check Azrael's computer, where Susie says, "What age did you and your brother draw this at? Hey, and in the corner, that's the cat thing from Castletown. You know, the shop thing. The cat, the Stitch thing, whatever." Which is clearly Sham. And finally, Spamton. But here's the thing. Sham knows about that shopkeeper, but has no real reason to know about Spamton. Sham has no real connection to Spamton at all. Unless, of course, Sham really is Mike. That also kind of recontextualizes the line of "we don't need any man, woman, or child at half price." Because Sham is none of those. It's interesting. Like, to have the line be, "we don't need any man, woman, or child at half price, we don't need Mike," as if Spamton's tacking that on afterwards because Mike isn't any of those. You get what I mean? But that finally connects Sham to all of the secret bosses that give shadow crystals in a way that is significant. So, going back to our diagram here, we can kind of see how these two things could potentially come together. If Sham was a character who had this voice box inside of them that is Friend now, that would potentially explain how Friend can still be the one who convinced Spamton to sign the contract, or like gave Spamton the contract that Tenna convinced him to sign, I guess. But Mike, or Sham in this case, was there as well and tried to stop Spamton from signing it, knowing that Friend is trying to control him. So, okay, this does bring up a pretty, I would say, important question, which is, so Sham uses they, them. Both Mike and Friend seem to use he, him. Kind of seems like it might shoot this theory down, you know what I mean? And that was one of the reasons I didn't make this back in the day. However, the more I think about it, the more I think this actually is kind of a compelling character arc. Toby has had non-binary characters in his games before, but generally those characters are just already non-binary at the very start, or they stop being non-binary at some point, that being, of course, Mettaton and Mad Mew Mew. And so having a character who actually becomes non-binary in the story might be, you know, something warranted. And Sham being Mike and Friend, now having a different name, going by they, them, but also having a backstory about freedom that ties in with the shadow crystals, it does make sense. And it's actually kind of an interesting take on something like this. This is a little headcanon-y, but hear me out, okay? Sham has freedom. Sham no longer matters to the overarching story. If Sham wasn't doing this quest for us, they could do whatever they wanted. However, Sham no longer has power. You know what I mean? Sham laments the fact that they are no longer important to the world. And I think you could tell a pretty compelling story about a character who has found contentment with themselves, but is now in a worse place than they were before because of it. And I think that could be a very interesting story, is all I'm saying. Where it would go, I don't know, but there's something there. And finally, we have the Seam Ripper. So this is a bit of a weird one, but in the official Undertale Deltarune cross-stitching manual that was released, there is a weapon description given for Sham called the Seam Ripper. It says it is a tool designed to allow for the easy removal of stitches. Its small curved blade cuts through the thread, while its blunt or ball-tipped point protects your fabric. Essential for ripping out a misaligned stitch if you're too far along to simply pull the threads back out. Now this is very interesting, because Spamton sort of prescribes control as being strings, right? And now the prophecy seems to be sort of a tapestry of strings. It is a tapestry of things that control the characters throughout Destiny, which is a mythological illusion, after all. So the idea that Sham might have the power to rip the threads a misaligned stitch in order to change the prophecy, or want to do that, is interesting. In this mock-up design that Toby made of Sham's staff, you can see it does look like a seam ripper, as if the pointed tip has been filed down and something has been sort of like stitched to it to make it round now, as if Sham has essentially given up the power to change fate and is now wielding something much softer, something not as sharp. In other words, basically kind of what I was saying before. But that's the theory. The theory is essentially that Friend Inside of Me is kind of true, that Friend is a microphone that used to reside within Sham and is now not residing within Sham. Friend and Sham had a very similar sort of situation going on with Control that Kris and us do now. And Sham is a character who has previously broken their strings, or someone has helped break their strings. It might have even been Des, which is very interesting, by pulling the tail off. And by doing so, Sham lost all purpose within the grand overarching narrative of Deltarune, but perhaps gained contentment in a way. They gained peace anyway, even if they are a nihilist about it. Does that make any sense? I don't know, but it's your problem now. I think some of the evidence in here is at least good. And I do think Sham will be a very important character in the Shadow Crystals quest, obviously. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of this is true, even if it's not all of it, you know? That's my theory for today. This is part of the 12 Days of Deltarune, where I'm making theories every day. Well, it's not always going to be theories, but Deltarune videos every day, up until the release of Chapter 5. So if you enjoyed, maybe subscribe. Maybe. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye!